You guys were talking about compression. I saw there were some of you guys who were really digging the 1176 clone as well as the LA-2A. You guys had some questions and were wondering why it was that you like. The reason you like is because you have a good taste. The reason that a lot of things that we hear in audio that we actually like is because we've actually heard them before. When people are like, oh, I bought this vintage microphone or I have this vintage piece of gear and I love how it sounds, is typically because it sounds familiar to you. It sounded like a record you listened to growing up, or just a particular sound that your brain is familiar with. When you hear it again, it triggers something in your brain, a feeling or whatever. So that's probably why you like it. LA-2A is a really popular compressor, from recording studios to all the way to radio, really popular in radio. A lot of radio personalities, when they speak, they typically would go through an LA-2A type compressor. Really quick description of the two. 1176, the black one, is a typical FET compressor. It's typically a little bit faster and a little bit more aggressive. It also has more settings than the LA-2A. So the 1176, actually you can adjust how quick or fast the compression happens and then how quickly it releases the compression. What that means is a very specific type of compression. It's called opto compression. And the way it works, actually, there's a small light bulb. The more voltage that goes through there, the brighter that bulb gets. There's a small cell in there that's a photo optic cell. The more light that picks up, the greater the amount of compression that happens in the box. It's actually a pretty cool circuit. The thing about the though is that you have no control over how fast or slow it actually happens. The more compression that happens in the LA-2A, the longer it takes for it to let go. That's why it works well for speech, slow songs, or singing, because it just keeps everything kind of smoothed out without having crazy peaks or transients. It works really well on vocals. It works really well on bass. It works really well on things that aren't really like transient, meaning they have lots of attacks or really fast. Like LA-2A on hi-hats is no. It's like a disaster. It'll just like kind of smear the hi-hats all over the place. It works really well on program material that's slow and doesn't have a lot of peaks. Just really basic compression. If you ever look up the definition, like the typical textbook definition of compression, when it comes to audio, people will say it makes loud sounds softer and soft sounds louder. That's how it's explained to a lot of us, especially when we're like going to audio school. They'll say like it makes loud sounds softer and soft sounds louder, which is like really straightforward and something that's easy to remember. But what's actually happening is your audio has something called dynamic range. That's the distance between the loudest part of the audio and the softest part of the audio. I'm gonna, as an example, use this room that I'm in. This room has pretty high ceilings. They're about 14 feet. The highest part of my room or my audio is 14 feet. The lowest part is obviously the floor. If I were to compress my room, I would start lowering the ceiling. As I lower the ceiling, everything in that room would feel like it was a lot bigger because I've reduced the dynamic range of the room. By my ceiling getting taller, everything that was low is now going to feel like it's much taller because it's a lot closer to the ceiling because I lowered it. That's essentially what you're doing when you're compressing things. You're reducing that distance that it can actually travel. So what happens is that the distance between the loud things and the soft things gets so close that everything seems like it's at the same volume. That's what they mean when they say it makes loud sounds softer and soft sounds louder. You're actually not making them louder. You're just pushing them closer together in volume so that they feel like they're at the same volume. It's not an illusion because you're doing it with actual voltage. You're reducing the space that voltage can be in, and essentially what it does is just brings everything up and it makes everything almost be at the same level. I hope that I didn't confuse you more. That being said, if you at the end of this thing don't get compression, if you don't get it next week, if you don't get it next month, do not worry. Do not beat yourself up about compression. Compression is really difficult to understand all the way because it's hard to hear in the beginning because you don't know what you're listening for. It's not like an EQ like, oh, I boost this frequency. Oh, okay, now I hear that. You can compress something a lot, and depending on the style of compressor, you might not be able to hear it right away. Right? Like that compressor might be a really cool transparent compressor that just, you're like, I don't hear the compression. You know, there's different types of compression. There's different types of circuits that are created for compression and they all sound different. Please guys, do not beat yourselves up about compression. It's one of the most difficult things to fully grasp when it comes to this audio stuff. It took me 2 years post graduating from Full Sail to the point where I was like, oh, it was just like one day, like it hit me. From then on, then I just kept experimenting, and still to this day, sometimes I'll find the new box and I'll be like, this is the best compressor ever. Like that green one that I used on the vocal. I love that compressor. I think it sounds great. It does something a little bit different than any other compressor I've heard before. Again, guys, you have to be patient with yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you don't get it. I guarantee you that most of the people in like chat rooms that you go that are talking to you about compression probably don't get it either. They're just saying they do so they don't sound crazy. It's okay, guys. Compression's hard, I know, but doesn't mean that you should stop trying to do it. Cool?